Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Everything You Need to Know About Software Licensing. I'm your host today, Louise Stebbings, and I'm Marketing Manager here at Flexera. I'd like to thank you just for bearing with us while we were sorting out some technical difficulties there. Before I introduce our speakers, I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping. What you're going to see on your screens in 2 seconds is a little thumbs up or thumbs down sign. I'd be grateful if you can hear me and you can see the slides, if you can just click on the thumbs up sign, that would be absolutely fantastic. And I will just, while I'm waiting for you to respond to that, I will just run through some further housekeeping. So the boxes you'll see on your screen, they're all movable and resizable. So if you want to make the slide deck bigger, just go ahead, make that bigger. If you want to minimize it, go ahead and do that. We're aiming to keep this webinar to about 30 minutes today. There will be questions, time for questions at the end of the webinar. So please put any of your questions into the chat box. I will keep an eye on that. And I'll make sure that we try and get to your questions. If we don't have time to get to your questions, we will follow up with you after the webinar. So please don't be concerned if we're not able to answer your questions on the webinar. Some networks that you're on may cause your slides to advance a bit more slowly than others. We do advise logging off your VPN. And if you find that your slides, what you're seeing is behind what we're saying, just press F5 to refresh the page. You can also find some additional answers to common technical issues in the help tool at the bottom. So you should see a little question mark at the bottom of your screen. So just click on that if you're having any technical issues. And just finally, you will get a copy of the recording in the next 24 to 48 hours. So our speakers today are Dan Johnson, Product Marketing Manager here at Flexera, and Mark Shin, he's the Technical Product Manager for our software licensing product. So without any further ado, I shall hand over to you, Dan.
Okay, thanks, Louise, and hello, everyone. So let's start today with a basic question, which is, why is licensing important for you to begin with? And I think the first two reasons are fairly self-explanatory and well understood, right? Software licensing and licensing in general protects your intellectual property, which is very valuable to you. And it helps ensure that you get paid what you're entitled to be paid, that every use of your software generates the correct revenue for you. What some people might not think about as much with licensing is how it can help you actually reach new customers and new markets. And so this is something I think you should keep in mind today as we go through this presentation, and especially as we go through our use cases, is how can some of these things apply to your business. So one way that licensing is used that maybe is not as apparent to a lot of people is the ability to use packaging options to create new products. And this could be a software product where you are creating new feature bundles, or it could be in a hardware product. We've seen companies that are able to reduce the number of hardware SKUs they have by including various hardware elements into a core product and activating features through software when customers need them. And so it's really a way to become much more efficient in your overall packaging. And once you have that kind of capability, you can react more quickly to market changes, create these product variations, and bring them to market much more quickly. And there's various ways to create these packaging options. As you can see on the slide here, you could have feature sets defined by various markets. You could create tiered functionality, such as we have here with a good, better, best arrangement. Or you could create a base level product and let users decide which capabilities they want to add on as options, and they can pick the ones that are most suitable for their needs. And if you have things like base offerings or the good offering here, a lower tiered offering, these might allow you to even achieve lower price points, which is one of those ways, another way really, that you can reach new customers. So let's look at some common licensing types so that we're all operating on the same definitions here, especially as we get into our use cases. So perpetual licenses Very common. This is the way software had been licensed for a long time. And perpetual means that it carries no expiration date. So this doesn't offer a lot of protection for you. It's a simple thing for everyone to understand, but it doesn't prevent your software from being installed on multiple systems or used by unauthorized users. And so other systems, of course, became more popular. We can start with node-locked here. So a node-locked license is assigned to one or more specific systems and then is used by a variety of users, but the license itself is assigned to the system. Sort of on the flip side of that would be user-based licensing, where the license is assigned to one or more specific users and could be used on various systems. So a particular user may be able to go from one computer to another or to different types of devices and still access the software. Another common implementation is concurrent, which is often used with groups of users, where there is a pool of shared licenses, and various users can check out a license from the pool, use it on whatever system they happen to be on, and you can keep adding users until you reach some quantity limit of that pool. Other options include subscriptions. Subscriptions are definitely growing in popularity. This is a term-based program, might run 1 year, 3 years, whatever the case might be, with the user making recurring payments. Subscriptions are a great way also of reaching new markets and new users, especially where the solution has a significant upfront investment. There may be potential customers there that can't justify or afford that upfront investment if they were purchasing, but a monthly payment of that system might fit well within their budgets and allow them to control expenses. Consumption or usage-based licenses are based on actual usage. So in a manufacturing environment, for example, it might be the number of operations performed by a particular machine over some period of time. Customers like that, obviously, end users like it because they're paying only for what they actually use. A metered license means that we are counting the use of the software against some defined limit. So if there could be an arrangement where the software can be used a certain number of times per day, per month, whatever it might be, and each time somebody initiates use of it, we count that against some sort of meter. An outcome licensing is one that also has some future potential where fees are based on some measured results. So if we're looking at a solution that is supposed to deliver an increase in productivity, the fees that are paid are actually measured against what that actual productivity increase turned out to be. And if you're looking at these and thinking that these could be used in various combinations, you're on the right track, because certainly you could have software that is node locked and metered, or many other combinations. And so when you think about other customers you might be able to access, new markets you get into, and how would you sell your products to those users, there's probably some combination of licensing solutions that would allow you to make that sale. And then one last thing before we get into some use cases is to keep in mind that licensing models are different than deployment models. And so deployment models are the delivery mechanism, and various licensing models could be used with these deployment models. The main three, and ones that we'll talk about today, are SaaS offerings, which are obviously very popular these days. On-premises, where the software resides on or is operated by the end user, and embedded, where software would be included into a piece of machinery or other equipment like that. And so, again, you might have subscriptions that are SaaS deployed, and you could have subscriptions that are deployed on-premise as well, depending on the end user's needs. So those are some of the common terms that we're using today, and it's most real to you when you hear some use cases. So Mark will be going through several different use cases and giving you some real-world examples. Mark?
Thank you, Dan. Yes, so I'm going to talk about kind of how you'd select your approach to licensing based upon these use cases, 6 kind of hypothetical use cases. But firstly, I thought I'd just visit kind of what are the questions I'd ask when I was thinking how am I going to put together a strategy to license my software or my product. And initially, I've got to think, well, what am I monetizing? Do I just want to give out a kind of all-you-can-eat perpetual model, or do I want to think about monetizing by result, or only allowing a certain number of people access, or even monetizing by usage and billing later? But then I want to think, well, how's my software deployed? As Dan said, am I on premise? Am I in the cloud? Am I completely disconnected from the internet? Which really goes hand in hand with, am I connected? So am I disconnected on a dark site? Am I on an intranet? How's my software going to talk to the rest of the world? And then finally, am I selling just to individual consumers, or am I selling to organizations where a large number of instances of my software or my product are in one location, whether that's a geographic location or whether that's within a computer network? So let's dive into some use cases, and we're going to start kind of on the simpler ends of things. So imagine you are producing a handheld scanner that's used by a delivery firm. So the courier needs to use this scanner every day to perform their daily route. And this thing has to function every day, regardless of whether it's like kind of at 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, it's managed to get an internet connection wherever that scanner happens to be in the world. You probably are differentiating according to the software license on this. So you want to be giving different capabilities to that device depending upon what that particular customer has bought from you. And of course, we're in an embedded smart device, patchy internet connectivity. And although we're selling to large organizations, these devices are actually really distributed both on computer networks and geographically. So in this case, we'd start looking at something quite simple. We'd start looking at kind of as a certificate or one-time activation over the internet that would then would be node locked onto that hardware. So you have your licenses going straight onto that hardware, and it's the hardware that you are enabling rather than a particular user. And you're probably looking for a technology involving an SDK so that it can perform some form of on-device protection on that scanner. So that's a fairly simple use case. We get a bit more complicated if we start talking about a kind of high-end desktop application, maybe a photo editing software. And there are so many different ways you might want to sell this. Kind of, I almost don't want to kind of suggest one over the other in this situation. What's more important is that in this situation, you're deploying onto a desktop or a laptop. And that kind of deployment is a little bit more vulnerable to people trying to abuse licensing to get extra entitlement or be able to run additional copies. And moreover, if you have things running out on laptops, particularly if you're with creative people, as a photo editing piece of software would be, they may well want to be using it on an aircraft where there's potentially no internet. They might want to go and sit in the middle of a park, or even take it kind of on vacation out into the middle of nowhere and still use that software. So you want something that can do kind of offline borrow functionality. And finally, also, you're probably selling to consumers, but you might also be selling to organizations with kind of a small user base within that organization, rather than lots and lots of copies of that software within the organization. So the primary thing that you're looking for here is an SDK with really good on-device protection. You really want to anchor down onto the device so that you're protected against people trying to abuse the situation. And you want something that can really seamlessly deal with offline borrows so that your creatives on their laptops can go and do whatever they need. You might be looking for one-time activation or using a cloud license server so that the small numbers of consumers or the employees within your organization, as they're internet connected, can do what they need to do without needing to run kind of additional on-prem software. And the license model, node lock, consumptive, metered, really depends upon exactly how you want to be selling this. But the value here is in having a really good SDK. A more interesting example here would be, say, an industrial plant. So maybe you make robotic arms for manufacturing, and there are particular tools or particular actions that this robot arm can do that are particularly valuable, and you want to be charging for that feature, but your customer might only want to use that in a limited set of situations, and would want to control their spend on that feature. So you'd want a licensing mechanism that can allow your customer to control that. Now, obviously, we're selling into an organization, a factory. It's almost certainly got a network within the factory, but that network's not going to be internet connected, and all these devices are embedded anyhow. And the real value you're looking for here is a good on-premise license server. So in this kind of situation, you want to be able to put a license server directly onto that intranet, that firewalled network for the factory, that allows the customer to really control and be able to direct the use of the licenses that they've bought, the entitlements that they've bought, and then control how their factory works to the most efficient way that they can for their situation. That almost certainly then brings us towards a concurrent model, where, say, the factory is only entitled to use kind of 2 of their robotic arms, use this special tool at any one time, or maybe you're getting on towards metered or consumptive, where the factory is just monitoring what it's doing and then sending back information for billing later. And again, being embedded, we're probably looking at an SDK at this point. Another slightly different example. What if I were producing video rendering software that ran on a server farm? So we might be selling to large organizations with hundreds of servers. We might be selling to a really small video editing house that has 2 servers, for example. Almost certainly, again, internet connected, probably on-prem. Some of these organizations may be putting the software up into the cloud now. But you might also want to think, well, how am I going to monetize this? Do I want to just monetize for a certain number of servers? Or would it be better to think, can I monetize according to outcome? So could I monetize per frame or by pixel that I rendered, and monetize by the value that you are providing to your customer, rather than simply yes or no, it's running, it isn't running. But one of the really valuable things you could do in this case, again, we're probably looking for license servers to help those administering this server farm to control how they're using their licensing and really understand it. But you'll probably want a flexible model. So your smaller video editing house might want a cloud server, because they don't really want the overhead of running an on-prem server, whereas a huge farm might want to run an on-prem server so that they can then have all the efficiency of having all that communication, all that control in-house for them. Again, depending upon how you're deciding to monetize, you're probably looking for a metered or maybe a consumptive model, and you might want to consider overage as well. So like a cell phone or a mobile phone contract, they might want to purchase a certain amount of capacity on that system, and if they exceed it, then go into an overage window and true up on a certain schedule. Now, so far we've kind of talked about kind of quite traditional kind of pieces of software that that kind of on device or on desktop or on server. But what if I'm up in the cloud? What if I'm creating things that are working as software as a service? So in this kind of situation, you trust the hardware you're running on, you trust the hardware you're running on because it's up in the cloud, so you're using a trusted provider. Your users are all connecting to it, so they're all internet connected. And you're probably selling something like a workflow management application to a large organization who is then paying per user, and you are allowing access on a per user basis. So you're probably looking for a slightly different way of doing licensing here. So it may well not be applicable to embed an SDK into your cloud software, your SaaS software, because SDKs often tend to be written in language such as C, C++, Java, compiled languages, and your cloud software may be running in some other language, and you don't really want to try and integrate the SDK into that. And you wouldn't be getting benefits from it, seeing as you're on trusted hardware anyhow. So maybe you want a REST API that plugs into the licensing system, so then you can write your own interface in your own as applicable for your application, and then it will talk to the licensing server probably to then acquire licenses. So again, if you've got a cloud solution, then you probably want your licensing solution vendor to be running a cloud license server that you can call into with this REST API. So a final use case, how about home automation? So a kind of classic IoT use case. So relatively cheap hardware, kind of whether it's lights turning on and off, automated, internet connected, thermostats, things like that. But selling into the consumer market. So these devices, they're obviously connected through the home broadband, but you probably want your consumer to have the ability to log into a portal and add or remove capabilities from their system kind of at will, and be able to self-serve that, and then have their home automation devices update themselves in a timely manner. And that would then be not only turning on and off different capabilities, but then also maybe looking at add-ons and being able to monetize those as well. And in a fast-moving market like that, you may well be looking for rapid implementation, which again might sway you more towards a REST API than an SDK. So thinking about something that you can rapidly build up. And also, particularly if you've already got REST technologies within your kind of tight footprint devices, then maybe actually adding licensing via REST API probably adds very little extra footprint to otherwise kind of quite tightly bound devices. And again, a really good advantage here would be a cloud license server, so that the vendor of your licensing solution runs this for you, and all your different consumers connect up to that via the home broadband systems. So that's just some quick use cases, example use cases of what you might be thinking about doing with licensing. But what should you look for if you're looking for a vendor to supply a licensing solution to you? So your software, you want to make sure that licensing technology has the features that you need, and it kind of goes without saying that this thing needs security built in. So any license that arrives at your software, you need to be able to authenticate that it is valid and it's come from you, rather than being spoofed by anybody. You, as we said before, we're probably looking for technologies that anchor and provide offline borrows, and also you want it to support not only the license model that you want to use, but other license models as well. So you have overhead, you've got a roadmap or a runway to expand into technologically, or if you want to change how you do your business, how you sell your software, you have options without large re-implementation. In terms of the actual technology, an SDK or an API, generally, if you're on a common platform, a kit, that's quite an easy thing that just to easily pick up and use. If you're looking for something more universal, then the REST API is amazing for you. But also, if you're using something really esoteric, kind of a very specific platform, hardware platform, then an SDK that can compile straight onto that platform or even onto bare metal hardware is really good. And if that's all in one solution, so you can mix and match, that's ideal for your flexibility. And again, also architecture, certificates and activations and license servers, as we talked about, and the ability to mix and match and be able to use those as applicable to you would be really powerful. But we've talked a lot about license servers, so I think it's only worth saying, well, what should I be looking for in a license server? You again want to make sure that it can be deployed flexibly. So maybe you deploy onto dark sites where there's no internet connectivity ever. You want to be able to run a license server there, or on-prem or at the edge, as we now say with SaaS and IoT, or up in the cloud, the same technology being able to be used flexibly in all these places. You want to make sure that it's going to work at the scale and the performance you need. So if you're running 10 or 20 pieces of software, not a big issue. If you're running 10 or 20,000 pieces of software, make sure that your server can cope with that and that can cope performantly with the frequency that your software is going to be calling in. And you want to architect your system so that you don't put a particular peak into how everything calls in. So you don't want to create it so that all your software calls in on the hour, every hour. That's architecturally not a good thing to do. But if you have a business reason for it, such as a change of shift in a call center or something like that, then make sure that your license server can cope with that as well. And then finally, you want something that's really going to empower your customers. They want to be able to understand what's happening with their licensing. They want to be able to reserve counts or for groups of clients or people or users who are privileged and need special access to licensing. And they should have the power to be able to tweak how the licensing works within parameters you set, so that then they can make the most efficient use of the licensing.
That is great. Thank you very much, Mark. So just looking through the questions. I can see a couple have come in here, so I'll just pick one up here. So we have one, Mark, I think this is for you. So somebody's saying here, why I could potentially build a system in-house. Why would I purchase a licensing system if I can build one in-house?
Okay, sorry. Yeah, just finding my mute button. I think that's an excellent question, and it's kind of the elephant in the room when we talk about buying in software licensing. But I've actually done it. I've actually created an in-house licensing mechanism for when I was a software engineer. And I'll tell you a few reasons why I think it's better to buy in. Firstly, you want something that's tried and tested. You as a single software house compared to someone who sells software licensing for a living, you will never see as many scenarios with software licensing as a vendor will. So you want something that's tried and tested across all those scenarios, and then also is flexible so that it can cope with changes of how you want to deploy your software. So if you build in-house, you're only going to build probably one model in one particular scenario. And if you want to change that model, you're going to be spending a lot of engineering efforts to do that, as opposed to just switching in a slightly different set of tooling or a slightly different model from the vendor. But also what we haven't talked about here, we've only talked about licensing, which is how the end software is understanding if it's allowed to run and how it runs. But we haven't talked about a back office, and what you really want is your licensing to be able to integrate with a back office which controls entitlements and can then integrate again with order management systems. So then you've got a full holistic system. And it then just goes so much beyond, I'm just going to get a software engineer to write something that turns on and off things within my software. It becomes a whole holistic business thing of, this is how I'm selling software, from order management all the way down to the software kind of in the hand of the consumer or of the customer.
That's great. Thank you very much, Mark. So thank you to Mark, thank you to Dan, and thank you to all our attendees. Just like to reiterate, you will get a copy of this recording. It will come within the next 24 to 48 hours, so keep an eye on your inbox. And if you have any questions in the meantime, please don't hesitate to contact us using these emails. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for your time today.